Don, do you have it?
It's recording now.
Okay, good. Okay, would everybody please turn off their video? Jean, Macaulay, and Amy, and the Benners, you need to turn off your, and Samantha, you need to turn off your video.
They're not on. What you're seeing is their background photo.
Oh, all right. Guess we'll have to deal with that then.
No, that's good.
Okay, at this time, I would like you to invite you to light a candle there at home for a joy or concern that you may have. Sally is having some real bad problems with her.
No, I'm okay now.
Oh, are you, Sal? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Oh, terrific. Sally will play the prelude while we light the candles.
This prelude, though, the music was originally written by a fellow called Roland Hugh
Can you
Pritchard.
give me permission?
Oh,
Okay, Don's recording it.
Oh, okay. Okay,
are we okay?
okay.
Okay, the music was written by Roland Hugh Pritchard. He lived from 1811 to 1887, and this has had a lot of different verses. We have two versions in our own UU hymnals. One is in the regular hymnal, and it's called Years Are Coming. And then a wonderful young folk musician, wonderful guitarist, Peter Mayer. I thought he was from Peter, Paul, and Mary. No, this is a young fellow who lives in Minnesota, and he's a wonderful singer. And if you wanted to hear his version, he wrote the words in 2002 to the hymn we know as Blue Boat Home. And it's coming. I just have to go around the table. You'll recognize the tune.
Thank you, Sally. The choir sings that song every Earth Day. Our blue boat home is our earth. The chalice lighting, the words are by Laura Horton Ludwig. Fire and water, ancient opposites, sun and ocean, the cradle of life, dancing flame and dancing river. We invoke them today as we kindle our chalice flame. Light the chalice. I'd like to show you something. I hope you can see it. I don't know if you have a full screen of me or not, because it's going to be hard to see otherwise. You see this? This is what the universe looks like, just this black. And this is a sunbeam. And this is the Earth. This picture was taken by Voyager 2 back in the 1990s, I believe it was 1990, from the orbit of Neptune. Just that tiny little blue dot is who we are. The opening words are by Carl Sagan, and it's entitled The Pale Blue Dot. From the distant vantage point of deep space, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest, but for us, it's different. Consider that, again, that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forger, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father and hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended on a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph, they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale blue dot. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceit than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. And I'd like to introduce our speaker. Don Wright and his wife Jeannie live in Dunellen, Rainbow Springs to be specific, and have been members of NCUU since 2010. Don retired in 2007 from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, College of William and Mary, where he was professor specializing in physical and geological oceanography. Prior to moving to Virginia in 1982, Don was on the faculty of the University of Sydney, Australia. Don received his PhD from Louisiana State University in 1970. He continues to work part-time as Director of Coastal and Environmental Research for the Southeastern Universities Research Association, a nonprofit Washington-based consortium of 60 universities. Most recently, he researched, edited, and contributed chapters to the book Tomorrow's Coasts, Complex and Impermanent, which was published in 2019, and we have it in our library, by the way, by Springer International Publishers, as well as climate change-related articles in scientific journals and international conferences. Don currently serves as chair of the NCUU Social Justice Committee and is member of the NCUU Board of Directors. Don?
Good morning. Can you see me? I can't see myself because I put a text on my screen. Can you see me okay, Pam?
I can see.
Okay, good. The text of what I'm going to say will be posted as a PDF on our website, by the way. And at the end of that PDF, you'll find some other readings if you want to get more deeply into this subject. What I'm talking about today really reflects the convergence of nature and people And the whole idea of people being separate from nature is what we want to try to get away from. And the idea is that people are part of nature and they are just as strongly affected by what's happening in the way of climate change as polar bears are. The first and seventh Unitarian Universalist principles state respectively, reaffirm and promote respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And the seventh is, and the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Interdependence is a fact of nature and humanity. The interdependence of natural environments and humanity in a time of climate change is already giving rise to highly complex and often frightening outcomes. In 1832, the Suquamish chief Seattle, a Native American, declared, all things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the children of the earth. And Rachel Carson said it this way, but man is part of nature, and his war on nature is inevitably a war on himself. Or to quote the Taoist philosopher Alan Watts, the sense of alienation between man and nature leads to the use of technology and a hostile spirit, to the conquest of nature instead of intelligent cooperation with nature. Most of the world now realizes that climate change is very real and is posing a crisis that must be addressed soon. The teenage activist Greta Thunberg is obsessed by the grim plight of future generations for good reason. Beyond concerns for wildlife and nature, the need for the world to become more aware of climate change and its tightly interwoven aspects of poverty, immigration, racism, famine, and human health is urgent. Worldwide, tens of millions of people are in jeopardy of becoming climate change refugees within a decade. Non-whites and the poor are the most vulnerable. To go back to a few years before I was born, now just for a moment, the Dust Bowl refugees from Oklahoma and the Plains states in the 1930s were prominent examples of the tragic impacts of degraded environment on humanity. This was the worst drought in US history, and thousands died from the heat alone. By some estimates, as many as 400,000 migrants displaced by the Dust Bowl headed west to California during the 1930s. The plight of some who reached the camps in California was vividly described in John Steinbeck's book, Grapes of Wrath. But others never quite got to California. As the migrants' numbers swelled, California tried to stop the migration. In what was called the bum blockade, police met migrants at the state line and told them to go away, but most had nowhere else to go. Here's one verse about that from Woody Guthrie's song, Dust Bowl Refugees. Yes, we ramble and we roam, and the highway, that's our home. It's a never-ending highway for a Dust Bowl refugee. The Dust Bowl lasted a decade. Recent studies, however, several of them, predict that climate change could cause a 30 to 40 year drought in the Southwest and Great Plains before the end of the century. And one recent study that just came out a couple of weeks ago suggests that a mega drought may already be developing. According to author Todd Miller in his recent book, Storming the Wall, Climate Change, Migration, and Homeland Security, Phoenix, Arizona could become the epicenter of a new American dystopia that causes a major exodus of refugees. Today, the threats to humanity presented by global climate change are orders of magnitude worse than the Dust Bowl. in terms of the vast numbers of people likely to be affected. The impending pressures on the borders of the US and other affluent countries will be unprecedented, according to Todd Miller. Denial of climate change by the public and politicians will only exacerbate, not eliminate, the threats. Everyone must realize that climate change is not a hoax. Let's just talk for a moment about the reality of climate change. The sources of information on climate change, despite what some on Fox News say, is impeccable. The information is impeccable. There are many scientific reports. I won't read them now. If you want to read the details, download the PDF from the website. But I can tell you that the important one that comes out that's renewed every 2 years is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. This is a definitive source of the current scientific consensus on the causes and consequences of global change. Their latest report presents exhaustive and conclusive evidence that air temperatures at the Earth's surface, as well as sea temperatures, are rising, leading to a host of other climate and ocean changes. And the report expresses 90% confidence that warming is the result of emissions of greenhouse gases from fossil fuels. Here's a brief summary of what the future global changes include. Atmospheric warming, of course. By the end of the century, the globally average temperature increase is expected to be somewhere between 1.8 and 4 degrees Celsius, which corresponds to 3.2 and 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And remember that this isn't local warming. This is averaged over the entire Earth's surface, including the oceans, and it's averaged over the year, all seasons. Most of this warming is concentrated in the higher latitudes and the polar regions rather than in the tropics. And the Arctic is warming more than twice as fast as the rest of the world. That's not true of the Antarctic, only the Arctic. Now, of the global warming that's taken place over the last 2 decades or so, roughly 93% of that heat is currently estimated to be stored within the upper kilometer or so of the ocean. Ocean temperatures are expected to rise significantly. Tropical storm intensity is increasing, largely because of increased sea surface temperatures. The rapid intensification of many recent storms and the record number of hurricanes in 2020 have been attributed to unusually warm sea surface temperatures in the Caribbean, tropical Atlantic, and Gulf of Mexico. Today, right now, Super Typhoon Surugai in the Western Pacific is bearing down on the Philippines. On Friday, day before yesterday, it was a Category 1 storm. As of yesterday, it had intensified to a Category 5 in 1 day. And remember, this is in the Northern Hemisphere, in the Western Pacific as well. It's mid-April here and it's mid-April there. It's still in the spring. It's not in the middle of summer yet. And this is a rapid intensification. It's a record rate of intensification. This is a huge typhoon. Another effect is that rising temperatures are increasing the rates of evaporation. And this is countered by increases in precipitation. As a consequence, droughts and floods are both increasing. Melting of great glacial ice in Alaska, Greenland, and Antarctica, along with the melt of permafrost and a reduction in sea ice cover across the Arctic Ocean, are already taking place and expected to accelerate. Global sea level is rising, and we know that's a very acute reality here in Florida. And it's expected to do so throughout the 21st century. Sea level is expected to be between 20 and 50 centimeters higher than today by the end of the century. And ocean circulation is being altered. Many of the large-scale ocean current systems, such as the Gulf Stream, are slowing down. Reduction in Gulf Stream transport is causing sea level to rise along the US East Coast. During the discussion, if you want to ask me why that is, I'll be happy to explain it. But let's turn our attention now to the human side of this problem. Vulnerable communities. Coastal and flood-prone communities are facing increasing hazards, including compound flooding by coinciding or sequential storm surge and torrential rains, and lingering post-event impacts on human health, superimposed on progressively rising sea levels. There is now a broad consensus that because of rising sea levels, communities in low elevation coastal zones are vulnerable and will be much more vulnerable in future decades. In the US, it is people of color and the poor who are most seriously impacted. Worldwide, the majority of affected residents are poor and underrepresented, resulting in increasing levels of social vulnerability to coastal hazards. In his recent book, Extreme Cities, scholar Ashley Dawson discusses the growing vulnerability of impoverished people living in coastal cities, particularly coastal megacities, to the impacts of climate change. Dawson points out that worldwide, nearly 2 billion people currently live in densely populated, flood-prone urban environments that are subject to storm surges and river floods. Low-income and minority residents are the most at risk from these hazards, and unfortunately, they are not empowered to adapt like the wealthier people are. The vulnerability of these populations now and in the future depends not only on the environmental threat itself and the fragility of the people, but also on the investments that local, state, and federal governments are willing and able to make in order to protect the most vulnerable. Where feasible, preferred mitigation strategy for residents of low-lying, flood-prone areas is relocation. However, it is understood that this strategy is unrealistic in the majority of cases for various reasons, and is in fact impossible for residents of low elevation island nations, such as the Maldives and the Marshall Islands. For those people, relocation means becoming an environmental refugee. I want to look for just a moment at recent events in the western side of the Atlantic and the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. Storm impacts on the Gulf Coast and Central America in particular. The Louisiana Coastal Protection and Reclamation Authority projects that by 2050, most of Louisiana's wetlands will have been replaced by open water. Residents are increasingly faced with difficult decisions on whether to adapt or relocate. Residents of Ile de Jean Charles, which is an indigenous community located within Louisiana's Bayou region, have already reached a critical tipping point, and over 75% of that community has been displaced to the town of Houma by land loss. In summer of 2020, less than a year ago, Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Sally, Tropical Storm Beta, and Hurricane Delta all hit that part of Louisiana and caused extensive flooding and serious damages in coastal Louisiana. And then in the fall of 2020, all the way into November, there was a rapid succession of hurricanes Eta and Iota. Remember, we're now way into the Greek alphabet on naming storms. There have been a bunch of them. Those storms are Eta and Iota in particular caused flooding that wiped entire communities off the map in Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala. Many homes were destroyed. Millions of people were affected and a famine ensued, and hundreds of thousands were displaced. This has been a major contributor to the crisis that is currently unfolding on the US southern border. Many of those at our gates are climate change refugees, not bums or criminals. Let's go up north now for just a moment and look at what's going on up there. It's out of our local realm, so it's a little bit out of touch with Florida, but the Alaskan Arctic is warming very quickly. Most Americans are unaware that the rapid warming of the Arctic Ocean and coast is already impacting the unique Arctic ecosystem and native Alaskan subsistence, health, and culture. These assets are tightly bound to and dependent on a frozen ocean and frozen permafrost on land. The media tends to emphasize the impact of ice melting on polar bears. The bears are certainly threatened, but the total environmental and human impacts are of equal or greater concern. Recent studies indicate that near surface air temperatures in the Arctic are rising 2 to 3 times faster than are temperatures elsewhere on the Earth's surface. The most serious and damaging socioeconomic impacts of the unfolding changes will be felt by indigenous Alaskan people. Native Inuit, Athabascan, Métis, and other indigenous inhabitants of Arctic Alaska have long understood that they have a delicate and complex symbiotic relationship with their natural realm and have depended on this relationship for their subsistence livelihood. Today, decreases in fish stocks and marine mammals are limiting the availability of traditional food sources. There are also direct impacts on housing and village infrastructure. Melting permafrost is causing loss of support for structures built on the tundra surface. Tundra, by the way, consists of typically, in the old days anyway, a thin active layer of lichens and mosses that thaws during the summer, but that's only inches thick. And then beneath that is permanently frozen ground, which is called permafrost, but that's melting. And that is the ground surface that many people have built their houses on, and those villages are being displaced by the melting permafrost. The other thing that's happening at the shore is that permafrost is melting and falling into the sea. And in some places, this thermal erosion is causing the shore to recede by as much as 6 kilometers per year in some places, particularly along the shores of the Beaufort Sea.
Methane.
And it's also releasing large amounts of methane gas. Arctic Alaskan communities have no access to roads or electric grids, so limitations on traditional means of transport by boat, sled, or overland traffic are quite consequential. Another thing that's happening because of the melting permafrost is that ice cellars, which are traditionally used for storing food, are thawing out and allowing food to spoil. And the thawing permafrost is contaminating ponds that are sources of drinking water. Climate change is also causing the spread of some diseases not previously present in the Arctic. Many indigenous Alaskans are likely to become refugees within a decade. And now I want to go halfway across the world to the Bay of Bengal. On the nations that surround the Bay of Bengal, an epic tragedy is looming. 1.4 billion people occupy the nations of Thailand, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and India, which surround the Bay of Bengal. And of those people, about 200 million live within coastal and river flood zones at elevations of 10 meters or about 30 feet above sea level or less. The convergence of increases in sea level, tropical storm severity, and the growing populations of dreadful urban slums are setting the stage for unprecedented future tragedy. In terms of vulnerability to human tragedy, Bangladesh and India are probably at the opposite extreme from the most affluent nations because of the poverty of the people and the general lack of infrastructure and resources. Much of Bangladesh is near or only slightly above sea level. Added to this is the fact that summer monsoons bring torrential rains that cause floods of the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers, as well as tropical cyclones that generate storm surges. A study conducted in 2007 found that residents with the lowest incomes had the highest level of exposure to floods, and concluded that these most vulnerable low-income residents had minimal access to flood preparation and post-flood recovery community assets. The major impacts of Bangladesh floods are death by drowning, waterborne disease, severe diarrhea, and snake bites. 75% of Bangladesh flood victims drown. Non-fatal impacts in Bangladesh include complete destruction of housing, loss of income, loss of livestock and grain, and general loss of food supply. Increases in soil salinity of agricultural lands in the Ganges Brahmaputra Delta are seriously reducing rice production. So what can we, people, do about these horrific problems? This is a complex problem. There are many facets to it. There are many pieces of it that are interacting with each other in a complex way. The world, the earth, the blue dot that Pam described is an extremely complex system. And it includes people, and it includes climate, and it includes a host of other things, innumerable other things, and they're all interacting. They're all interdependent and connected. Fortunately, there are some strategies out there that consider that. Modern day science is capable of modeling complex systems, and that's being done, but not being accepted by policymakers, unfortunately. There are mitigating strategies that have been articulated, such as the Green New Deal. They're out there, but their acceptance and implementation will require significant changes in priorities, lifestyle, and compassion by society as a whole. Concerns for global humanity and nature must supersede the goals of excess personal wealth and corporate profit. In addition to reducing carbon emissions and enhancing the resilience of threatened communities, we must reinvent our immigration policies to make them more compassionate and capable of addressing global challenges. As Naomi Klein points out in her book, On Fire, we can only meet this tremendous challenge together as part of a massive and organized global movement. This is Naomi Klein's book, one of the books, and I'm going to donate this book to the library as soon as I'm going to leave it here when I leave. I'm at the church right now, and it'll be here if anybody wants to read it. I recommend it strongly. But as Naomi says, we can only meet this tremendous challenge together as part of a massive and organized global movement. Regrettably, for the last 4 years, the U.S. has abdicated its role in leading or supporting such a movement. Denial of science and open disdain for objective scientists by many politicians and much of the public continue to significantly impede progress toward the solutions that are so urgently needed. Hopefully, as we enter a new era with a more enlightened administration, we can pull together and begin to change this situation. But to do this, we must completely overhaul our values, priorities, and mindsets. This requires education of the general public and especially our leaders. I think it's almost axiomatic now to say that ignorant leadership is an existential threat to humanity. Looking forward a few decades, most of the people who will have to adapt to and live with the world of tomorrow have not yet been born. And among those who have, few have so far completed their formal education. It is time now to transmit the understandings and values that future generations will need in order to slow climate change and adapt to a changing world. The essential education process should begin with preschoolers and continue through higher education and beyond. Appreciation of natural environments and humanity's dependence and impacts on them should be instilled in children at the earliest possible age and reinforced throughout their lives. For children in their formative years, it is important for parents and educators not to perpetuate the dualistic notion that humanity and nature are distinct and that the former must conquer the latter. Instead, the idea of intelligent cooperation with nature should be promoted as a human virtue. I will close by repeating the axiom pronounced in 1832 by Chief Seattle. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the children of the earth. I'll remind everyone that this coming Wednesday is Earth Day, and there is a link to a series of events, Earth Day events that begin on Tuesday. I think Connie has circulated that to you already, but there are 3 days of virtual events that you can join. And I'm going to, before I pass this back to Pam, I'd like to show you 4 slides that maybe amplify what I just told you. And so I'm going to show you a very brief PowerPoint slide show. And what I've got here is the landscape of coastal Louisiana as it was in 2017 and as it's projected to be in 2050. Louisiana is currently losing wetlands at a loss rate of about 41 square kilometers per year, and that's accelerating. The Louisiana Coastal Protection and Reclamation Authority projects that by 2050, there will be open water all the way to the town of Houma. And you can see, contrast the figure on the left with the one on the right, and you see it's a lot of land is going to be gone. This is a picture that from the Beaufort Sea coast in Arctic Alaska. And what
John, you might need to share. You may need to share your PowerPoint. We can't.
Oh, sorry. I have to get out of it to do that. Wait a minute. Let's share. Can you still hear me? Oh, okay, I'm still here. Okay, I'm going to try to share this. Is this showing up now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
All right, good. Okay, this is what I was showing you. I'm showing you a map of coastal Louisiana in 2017 on the left, and as it's projected to be in 2050 on the right. And you can see from this that most of that land south of the town of Houma has disappeared. It's disappearing at the rate of 41 square kilometers per year. What I'm showing you here is the Beaufort Sea coast of Arctic Alaska. And what you're seeing is thermal erosion of the shore and the melting of this permafrost. This is what permafrost looks like. That little grassy surface layer is the active layer, and everything underneath it is the frozen permafrost. It's melting. The Beaufort Sea water temperatures in the summer is well above freezing, and when it laps up against this permafrost, it melts it and it collapses into the sea. And in some places, that recession is going on at the rate of up to 6 kilometers per year. This is a map of the Bay of Bengal and its surrounding countries. And all of that area that's shown in red is below 10 meters or below above sea level. And the lower part, the biggest part of that you see is Bangladesh, which is the area that's got you see lots of little channels and estuaries. Between those are mostly mangrove forests. This is the realm of the Bengal tiger, of course, but all of this area in Myanmar, the coast of India, and particularly Bangladesh, are subject to flooding by the rivers, the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers, as well as by storm surge. Now, the final thing I want to show you is what I mean when I talk about dreadful slums. This is in the city of Calcutta, which is a city of 14.3 million people, with about a density of about 63,000 people per square mile. 2 million of these people are subject to inundation. Calcutta is on the western side of the Bay of Bengal. And that is a dreadful picture you see there.
Shanties.
Okay, Pam. Pam?
Okay, I'm trying to get the picture back.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do too. Okay.
Yes, Pam. Nice that
You, you may need to stop sharing. We see your desktop at this point.
There we go.
Okay,
Yes, generous.
there we are. Okay, now it's time for the closing words. Thank you, Don. That was just terrific. A wonderful, wonderful presentation. The closing words are by Carl Sagan. Human history can be viewed as a slowly dawning awareness that we are members of a larger
In
group.
400 yards, please turn right onto State Route 50.
Groups of people from divergent ethnic and cultural backgrounds working in some sense together is surely a humanizing and character-building experience. If we are to survive, our loyalties must be broadened further to include the whole human community and the entire planet.
Please turn right.
Somebody's mic is still on. It is time, our time together may have ended, but our connection to each other remains. Till we meet again, go in peace. And now, before we begin our discussion, may I remind you to please remember to mail your pledges and donations to NCUU Post Office Box 94, Holder, Florida 34445. Even though we are not meeting face to face, we still have expenses to pay, and your contributions are much appreciated. Now it's time for our discussion. If you would like to ask a question or contribute in any way, raise your hand and I will dispense.
Don, will you stop recording, please?
Okay, does anybody raise their hand? Or?